Hey guys, it's Hunter. Welcome back to another video. So, Chapman guitars. The Korean-made Pro Series is just amazing. The ML2 Pro Modern that I own is one of the best looking, best playing, and best spec'd out guitars in my collection, with a proper flamed maple cap, stainless steel frets, lumen lays, hip shot tuners, and neck through construction. Price, you are looking at about $1,200 US, not bad for all the specs you're getting, but also not super cheap. So enter the Chapman Standard Series. These are made in Indonesia and aren't as spec'd out, the idea being to retain the core premium playing experience but at a much more wallet-friendly price point. For 2019, they've been updated with newly designed pickups, and these V2s are now being made at a different factory. So how much Chapman does $499 get you, and how does it compare to the originals? Well, Rift City Guitar Outlet has sent this brand new ML2 over, so let's take a closer look. And before we take a closer look, I'd like to thank musictome.com for sponsoring this video. Music to Me is an awesome online music school with lesson plans for both guitar and piano. They're part of the Toman family brands, so you know they're reputable. Plus, that means that there are over 150 comprehensive guitar lessons are offered in both English and German. It's fantastic whether you just started playing and want a structured learning environment on your own schedule, or whether you've been playing for a while and want a refresher on the basics, which is what I've been using it for since I'm self-taught. I'll have more information later in the video, but if you've heard enough already and want to try it out risk-free, you can check out the link below for a free 30-day trial. And before we get into the review, I want to give a shout out to the Boogie and the rest of the patrons. Without you guys, this and all the other content just would not be possible. Now, a bit of context here. The patrons actually voted for me to buy, review, and then give away an ML2 Standard, so I went and bought one sometime last year, did all the B-roll and tone samples, and then Chapman came out with the V2s. I've been waiting until they were in stock in the US to compare them. So with that, let's get into it. Okay, so specs. It looks very similar to a lot of the other single cuts that I've had on the channel. It's got a thin beveled mahogany body with tummy and lower spoon cuts, a set maple neck, and a Makassar ebony fingerboard. The ML2 Standard currently comes in two finishes, Lunar and White Dove. Lunar comes with uncovered pickups and a flame maple veneer, whereas White Dove is just pure white with covered chrome pickups. The necks on both has satin natural finishes. Then the Lunar with its black hardware is more of a modern look, whereas the White Dove with chrome hardware looks slightly more vintage inspired. I'm a big fan of natural binding and it looks great on both finishes. In general, the build quality is incredibly solid. Strangely though, even with the relatively thin body, the ML2 Standard weighs a ton. I don't have a scale, but I can tell you that it weighs noticeably more than even the ML2 Pro that has a giant 3-ply slab of maple running right through the entire guitar. In fact, this is probably the heaviest import guitar I have in my collection right now, besides the Agile AL3200 MCC, which has a considerably thicker body. Fit and finish wise, it is very good, although not perfect. The pickup routing isn't the cleanest in a couple of places, and there is a ton of filler around the inlays, although it's not too noticeable with how dark the ebony board has been stained. But for guitars priced $500 or below, I don't think minor cosmetic issues are that big of a deal. I judge guitars in this price range by playability. And in that regard, this guitar plays remarkably similar to the higher end Pro version, but there are some differences which I'll get into. Something that sets the ML2s apart from most of the other single cuts I have on the channel is the 25-inch scale length. It's a nice compromise between the Gibson 24 3/4 inch and the Fender 25.5 inch. Makes bends more comfortable, and the overall guitar is slightly more fitting for down tuning while still feeling familiar to players of traditional single cuts. Another feature carried over from the Pro series is the rolled fingerboard edges. Now that's an aspect that I completely underestimated before I reviewed the ML2 Pro. I absolutely did not think that it would make that big of a difference in terms of feel, but it totally does. You know how a lot of new guitars, especially inexpensive ones, feel like they have kind of a blocky fingerboard on the edges? And it feels like that way for a while until you break them in? Well, this one is different. It feels pre-broken in, but not in a bad way. It doesn't feel like I've paid brand new pricing for a used guitar or anything like that. It just feels familiar right out of the box, like I've been playing this guitar for longer than I actually have. The frets themselves are really nice too. They're unfortunately not stainless steel like the Pro version, but they are jumbo, and with the rolled fingerboard edges, there are no sharp fret ends. Then there's this neck heel. Now while it's obviously not going to be as effortless for upper fret access as a guitar with neck through construction, the ML2 Standard has one of my favorite set neck solutions. Not only is there a slight body cutaway, but there's also a nice curved contour to rest your hand on while whittling away on the upper frets. Now something interesting is, while I thought they would have kept it the same between the Pro and the Standard, the neck sizes are actually different. They both have a C shape, but the one on the Standard is actually thicker. On the website, it's listed as only a millimeter difference at the first fret and half a millimeter at the 12th fret, but when you're playing both of them back to back, you can feel a definite difference. Even with the naked eye side by side, you can clearly see that the Standard's neck is noticeably thicker. That being said, this is still really comfortable. My point is that it's not an identical playing experience. And while the neck on the Pro is very modern feeling, this has a slightly more vintage touch. They both have a volute though, which I'm a fan of to protect against breakages around the vulnerable headstock area, something that Gibsons are infamous for. So while it's not identical, overall the thin body, the jumbo frets, the satin maple neck, the 25-inch scale length makes the Standard a really similar playing experience to my Pro, and I felt right at home as soon as I picked it up. It also helps that Riff City does a full inspection on every guitar they send out, so the guitar had a great setup right out of the box. Bonus points for coming with the cookie. Since the main focus of the ML2 Standard is playability and affordability, there aren't any non-essential features that would increase the price. No hip shot like on the Pro, but the standard Chapman tuners are okay. A couple of them feel looser than I would have liked, but mechanically they're fine, they're not jumpy. The Graphtec Tusk XL nut is great, no real tuning stability issues. The bridge, the stop tail, the knobs, they're not game-changing, but they are some of the higher quality generic hardware that I've come across. This Tune-O-Matic style bridge in particular is impressively sturdy. Palm muting feels chunky, which is always a good indicator of a solid bridge. For pickups, the ML2 has two direct-mounted Chapman Stentorian Zero humbuckers, which Chapman says have been completely redesigned for the V2 models. Through my dual rectifier, here are some tones comparing the two. have, so they're pretty hot pickups. Output-wise, they're rated even higher than the non-Zero branded Stentorians in the Pro series. They're definitely geared towards more modern distorted tones, but they can clean up nicely, especially with the volume rolled back if the situation requires it. The coil split is also a really nice inclusion. I prefer the sound of the V2s, they're much less muddy and do cleans better, but that's just my taste. Something I noticed when going between the pickups is that the switch is actually really good. On a lot of inexpensive import guitars, the switches are poor. They're really stiff while changing positions, they wiggle around a lot. It's one of those little things, but it's something you don't normally find in a $500 guitar, and it makes the ML2 Standard feel higher priced than it actually is. Before we get into the conclusion, here's a little more on today's sponsor that is allowing me to bring this free content straight to your eyeballs and or ear holes. As I explained before, Music to Me is a highly rated online music school which has professionally curated video lessons for theory, techniques, and even songs. Like there's a tutorial for the Game of Thrones theme song which you can learn if you weren't too bummed out by the finale. You can track your progress, and you can also chat with instructors in real time if you're having any issues. So not only is it a really cool service that over 10,000 students have already used to learn their instrument, but also they sponsored this video because they believe in the creation of honest independent review content for the guitar community. Supporting the sponsors is supporting the channel, so a link to a 30-day free trial is down below. If you don't like it, you can cancel, but if you do, membership start at only $10 a month. Okay, back to the conclusion. So there are two questions then when considering the ML2 Standard. Is it worth the $499 Chapman Guitars is asking for it, and how does it compare to the original V1 models? In short, the answers are yes and better. Inexpensive guitars are getting so good. I kept forgetting that the ML2 is a $500 guitar, and when I was evaluating it, I kept comparing it to guitars in the $800-ish price range. A lot of thought has clearly gone into the ML2 Modern. It's a familiar single cut shape with modern ergonomic choices, which I really appreciate in guitar design. The build quality is very, very good, and it is one of the best playing guitars I've ever tried in the low mid-tier price range. Now, if you're thinking of buying this as a mod platform, just be aware that because the pickups are direct mounted, you do have to drill out the mounting holes on the new pickups a little to work with wood screws. But yeah, for 500 bucks, this is an amazing player. Now, since the V2s have been launched, the V1s are being blown out at discounted prices. So is it worth seeking out a V2, or should you save the extra cash? Well, the first thing that I noticed is that the fit and finish on the V2 is much improved over the V1. For starters, the V1's finish was a little underwhelming. You don't expect guitars to always look as nice as they do in the stock images, but I was expecting something relatively close, seeing as my ML2 Pro looks arguably better than the one on the website. Unfortunately, the V1 didn't look nearly as nice as the stock images I've been drooling over. On the website, the transparent lunar finish over the flame maple veneer looks dark with a nice depth to it. The one that I picked up, it looks good at a distance, but up close it kind of looks flat and dull. It wasn't nearly as inspiring as I had hoped for. The V2 though, in the flat white dove finish, looks stellar and exactly as advertised. The fingerboard also looks much healthier on the V2. The V1 looked really dry even after a couple of go-overs with lemon oil. There's nothing wrong with a light-colored ebony board, but it also meant that the massive amounts of filler around the inlays was much more visible. With the V2, the routing around the pickups could be cleaner, there are little marks around some of the frets, but that's it. Then there's the sound. Again, there's a noticeable improvement with the V2. Now this may or may not matter to you if you're looking to pick one of these up as a mod project and plan to swap them out anyways. Tone is a matter of taste, but the newer pickups are more musical and less muddy to my ears than the V1s. Lastly, both guitars felt solid, but the V2 feels like the higher priced guitar. The reason? The fingerboard edges are rolled more aggressively than they were on the V1. This fingerboard is one of the most comfortable I've experienced on any guitar under $1,000. That last point alone makes the V2 a significant upgrade over the V1 and one of the most fun guitars I've tried for the price. I am always wary of guitars in this price range. In general, they're not good enough to last you forever, and they're not cheap enough to be great value for mod projects. You just end up losing money on the resale once you grow out of it and it's time to upgrade. The ML2 manages to break out of this mold. I thought it was just going to be a watered down version of the Pro, but it's not. Because of the thicker neck, it's its own beast, and playability wise, it punches way higher than its price tag would suggest. I have more than enough guitars, single cuts in particular, but I'm actually keeping this one. It is just that much fun. And if you're wondering what happened to the V1, there was actually a contest to win that guitar. I challenged the patrons to design the ugliest guitar concept ever, and Steve Irons won with this monstrosity. Disgusting. Congratulations, Steve. So if you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. These are just my opinions and I'd love to hear yours, so leave them in the comments. Be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell if you haven't already. If you want to support what I do and get exclusive perks, you can check out my Patreon. Thanks to Chapman for sending this guitar over and to Luke for mixing everything. Social media and merch links are down below. As always, thanks so much for watching. You've been awesome, and I'll see you for the next video.